Hey everyone, gerrymandering is a hot buzzword right now. We are seeing Texas Republicans drop any remaining pretense of fair play and embrace authoritarianism. They have slipped comfortably into their jackboots and donned their skull-adorned caps as they goose-step together into an off-cycle redistricting effort that seeks to rob Democrats of congressional representation. In this video, I'd like to give a brief overview of gerrymandering, why it is an issue in the United States in particular, why independent redistricting commissions are not the silver bullet that most people think they are, and what can actually fix our representation issues. Gerrymandering is the process of drawing single-member electoral districts to benefit the party in power. There are two common ways of creating an advantage: cracking and packing. Cracking is the practice of splitting the opposing party's supporters among a large number of districts, making sure that they are a minority in each district. Think of a city surrounded by farmland. It is a well-documented fact that cities are primarily Democrat and rural areas lean heavily in favor of Republicans. When cracking, a potential map that advantages the Republicans would include a slice of the city into the district with a majority of Republican voters, carving up the map like a pizza. This ensures that each district has a minority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans. This approach maximizes the amount of seats gained by the party in power. However, it is vulnerable to good years for the opposing party, when the pendulum swings back in the Democrats' favor. In this case, the Republicans could potentially lose all of their gerrymandered seats due to the slim margins in every district. A more permanent approach to gerrymandering is called packing. When packing, mapmakers attempt to stuff as many of the opposing party's members into a single district. This guarantees that the district will forever belong to the opposition. It also makes sure that the incumbent party enjoys much healthier margins in all the other districts and still retains a majority of the seats. This approach creates much safer seats which are not affected by the good years phenomenon. In our city example, an example of packing would be like drawing a circle district right in the middle of the pizza. That center district would belong to the Democrats, and as a result, all the surrounding districts enjoy much bigger Republican margins. Gerrymandering is anti-democratic. Instead of voters picking politicians, politicians are choosing their voters. It erodes trust in democracy and suppresses voter turnout, since people do not feel like their voices matter. It entrenches extremists in positions of power. This happens because the only threat to an incumbent in a gerrymandered district is a primary challenger from their own party. This means the politicians are only influenced by the primary voting base in their own party, which by and large are the most extreme voters. Republicans are forced to adopt more and more fascist attitudes. Democrats are forced to prioritize identity politics and language censorship. The same majority in the center is left without representation. Most developed nations do not tolerate this anti-democratic gamesmanship. In most other developed nations that use single-member districts, the politicians are removed from the process of creating maps. Canada, after a period of extreme gerrymandering, passed the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act in 1964, which created an independent commission for drawing its maps. The commission is designed to be independent and take input from the voting public. Canadian voters have a greater trust in their institutions than Americans, although there are certainly other factors in play than just the redistricting process. However, just like in America, Canadians are losing that trust. Quite a few states in the US have introduced independent redistricting commissions. California, Washington, Arizona all prohibit their politicians from drawing their districts. However, the gains in fairness have been modest at best. The most widely accepted measure of what constitutes a fair map is probably proportionality. The proportion of politicians from each party that are elected should roughly correspond to the makeup of the state. Independent redistricting commissions only slightly improve on that metric. Why is that? In his book, Why Cities Lose, Jonathan Rodden lays out a historical trend of partisan clustering. In simple terms, the main reason that districts are so skewed has more to do with where people choose to live rather than the maps lawmakers choose to draw. Don't get me wrong, gerrymandering is a huge problem, but even with independent commissions, studies have shown the gains in fairness to be small. The main fact is that liberal-minded people flock to cities, or cities have a liberalizing effect on people. Rural agricultural municipalities are overwhelmingly conservative. If drawing districts around communities, this fact almost guarantees that it is impossible to draw them in a way that creates competitive districts. Additionally, the fact that liberals cluster into cities in such large densities creates inefficiencies in the way districts are drawn. When Jonathan Rodden was interviewed by the Stanford Report, he had this to say. The intensification of urban-rural polarization in recent decades has led to an increasing concentration of Democrats in densely populated cities. In the United States and other former British colonies, legislative representation takes place through winner-take-all electoral districts. This form of representation causes difficulties for the Democrats because their support is inefficiently distributed across districts. Their candidates win by overwhelming majorities in large cities, but they often lose by a relatively small margins elsewhere. There are Democratic enclaves in smaller post-industrial cities and college towns spread out along the 19th century railroad tracks. But when districts are drawn, these concentrations are often overwhelmed by the surrounding sparsely populated Republican periphery. Thus, Democrats often win a greater share of votes than their share of seats, especially in the states of the Midwest, where it is commonplace for the Democrats to win statewide elections without coming anywhere near a majority in the state legislature or the congressional delegation. End quote. Various studies have shown that independent districting commissions produce more proportional maps. However, in this chart, we can see that commission-drawn districts produced less competitive seats in 2002 than politician-drawn districts in 1992. These commissions are not a definitive solution to our problems. So what is? Only a few developed nations use single-member districts, the most prominent being Canada, the UK, and the US. Most democracies use multi-member districts, which are significantly harder to gerrymander and produce much fairer representation. In a multi-member electoral district, the voters elect more than a single representative, usually between 3 and 8, with higher number districts preferred. In a multi-member district, the resulting makeup of its elected candidates much more closely resembles the electorate at large. When a single person is elected in a district, this effectively disenfranchises large numbers of people that did not vote for that official. These people do not have a representative that will advocate on their behalf. When there are 6 electeds in a district, it is virtually guaranteed that an overwhelming majority of the electorate will have a representative that they are ideologically aligned with. In order to implement this scheme, it is necessary to change the way we vote. The current system, called first past the post, gives a single voter only one vote. This doesn't work well for multi-member districts for a few reasons. In a highly urban Democrat-favored district, it is possible that multiple Democrats are running, but only one of them is extremely popular. Most people vote for that one Democrat who gets 50% of the vote, while the Republican vote is split between a few lackluster candidates, each getting 10%. It is possible that if we take the top 4 scoring candidates, the Republicans actually win more seats because one Democrat siphoned away all the votes from all the others. There are 2 most popular approaches that work in multi-member districts. One used by most countries is called party list proportional. In this approach, each voter gets a single vote, but instead of candidates, voters vote for political parties. So in most instances, with some exceptions, the ballot would not contain names of individuals. A liberal voter in the US would vote for the Democratic Party as a whole, and a conservative for the Republican one. Each registered party would be represented by a list of candidates. This list would either be compiled by the party itself or with input from voters. it would be known ahead of time or kept secret. Whatever the case, the seats in the district would then be apportioned to the parties proportionally to the amount of votes they received. So for a simple example, in a 5-member district, if the Democrats received 40% of the vote, the Greens 20, Libertarians 20, and Republicans 20%, then the Dems would get 2 representatives, and the other parties would each get 1. This accurately represents the makeup of the electorate in that district. This system is simple and maintains the same one person, one vote principle that we've operated under this whole time. However, I don't think it is optimal because it cements the concept of political parties in the system. Some of our most influential founding fathers, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, were wary of political parties, and for good reason. They understood the human tendency to embrace the interests of their tribe over the common good would be weaponized by established, powerful political groups. People would cease to evaluate candidates and policies critically, instead relying on the top-down guidance of their political tribe. And elected members of the party would not be free to follow their own conscience when it conflicted with the established dogma of their party. We see a lot of this blind faith and disregard for truth on both sides of the political spectrum today. A system that maintains individual candidates while still offering a fair representation in multi-member districts is called single transferable vote, or STV for short. In this system, voters rank their candidates from most to least favorable. If no candidate reaches 50% of the vote immediately, then the candidate with the least amount of votes is eliminated, and the people that rank that candidate first have their votes transferred to their second choice. This repeats until a candidate reaches 50% of the vote and is elected. Any extra votes for that candidate transfer to the voter's next choice. This process repeats until all seats have been filled. STV is currently successfully used by Ireland, Australia, and Malta. While not a cure for all of our democratic ills, multi-member districts using STV would help make our democracy more representative and drastically decrease uncompetitive safe districts. It would render gerrymandering toothless, since it would be almost impossible to draw districts fine enough to reduce representation for the opposing party below the threshold needed to win at least one seat in a district. And even if that was done, other districts would simply gain more representatives of that party. It would also be fairly easy to accomplish, at least on paper. All we would need to do would be to merge the existing districts together to create larger districts that can elect more representatives. The hardest thing to do would be to gather enough political will to actually make something like this happen. That's where my usual plea comes in. We have a broken political system that is no longer responsive to its citizens. Our politicians are deaf to the priorities of most of their constituents. They no longer even bother to hide their disdain for our concerns, canceling town halls and disenfranchising people through gerrymandering in plain view of everyone. We need new voices that will take up the hard work of democracy. In this fraught political moment, real change is possible. I encourage anyone and everyone to challenge incumbent state Democrats in primaries on the platform of electoral reform and democratic rejuvenation. I entreat you to run as independents against incumbent state Republicans in safe districts. We start this change at the local level and watch it transform the system from the ground up. There are so many pressing issues that need our attention: climate change, healthcare, AI, war, famine, wealth inequality. But none can be solved without the right people at the helm. We must reform.